What if I told you that the Mustang you remember from the mid-60s, the small, light, fun car that just about every young American wanted, had turned into something very different by 1971? By then, the Mustang wasn't that nimble little pony car anymore. It had grown longer, wider, and a whole lot heavier. You could see it in the sheet metal. You could feel it behind the wheel. It was a bigger, meaner machine. Now, back then, the car business was in the middle of what we like to call the horsepower wars. Every year, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, and Plymouth were battling to see who could build the wildest, fastest street car. But here's the thing. The government was starting to crack down. Emissions rules, safety regulations, insurance premiums, all of it was closing in. Everyone knew the golden days of raw horsepower were numbered. So Ford decided, if the end is coming, let's go out swinging. Their idea? Take the biggest, most brutal engine they had, the 429 Cobra Jet, and stuff it under the hood of the new Mach 1. And just to prove they weren't holding back, they built the most extreme version of that engine. The Super Cobra Jet. It wasn't built for comfort. It wasn't built for the faint of heart. It was built for one reason: pure, unfiltered speed. And while it looked like the dream car every kid wanted, for a lot of people, it turned into a nightmare. At the center of this monster was Ford's 429 cubic inch big block. Now, if you grew up around cars in the early 70s, you know exactly what that means: brute force. On paper, Ford claimed it made 375 horsepower. But anyone who ever tuned one of these engines will tell you that number was just a polite lie to keep insurance companies off their back. In reality, the Super Cobra Jet was easily pushing well over 400 horses, and every bit of it felt raw and untamed. This wasn't your everyday V8. Ford gave it 4-bolt mains, forged pistons, and a heavy-duty bottom end built to take punishment. It was made for drag strips, not grocery runs. And because it was the Super Cobra Jet, you didn't just get the engine, you got the whole package. Mandatory 3.91 or 4.11 rear gears, a serious cooling system, and your choice between a close-ratio 4-speed manual or a rock-solid C6 automatic. Everything about this car screamed one thing: speed first, everything else second. It wasn't the kind of car you cruised around town in. It was the kind of car you lined up at a stoplight with, knowing you could smoke just about anything next to you. Back then, if you were lucky enough to get behind the wheel of one, you knew immediately. This wasn't just another Mustang. It was Detroit's way of saying, we can still build something terrifying if we want to. On paper, the 1971 Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet looked like one of the fiercest street machines ever built. But it was out on the pavement where the legend was really made. A well-driven SCJ could hit 60 miles per hour in about 5.5 seconds, blistering speed for the early 70s. And in the quarter mile, the car could dip down into the low 13s, sometimes quicker with the right driver and a good set of tires. That kind of performance put it right up there with the kings of the era: Mopar Hemis, Chevy LS6 Chevelles, and the fastest GTOs. To the average car enthusiast of the time, this was heaven. Imagine being 20 years old, pulling up to the local drag strip, and knowing that your car had the muscle to go toe-to-toe with just about anyone. It was intoxicating. It made you feel untouchable. But while the numbers made muscle car fans grin, they made insurance companies and safety officials break out in a cold sweat. By 1971, they already knew these cars were accidents waiting to happen. For every driver who could handle that kind of power, there were a dozen more who couldn't. And when a 3,900-pound Mustang with over 400 horsepower got out of control, the results were rarely pretty. It was the perfect example of Detroit's philosophy at the time: give people the power they wanted, and let the consequences fall where they may. For all its straight-line speed, the Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet had a dark side. You see, Ford had built a rocket, but they put it inside a body that wasn't ready to handle it. By 1971, the Mustang had gotten big, almost 3,900 pounds big, and when you dropped that massive 429 engine into the nose, the balance was all wrong. The car was nose-heavy, and instead of dancing through corners like the Mustangs of the 60s, this one just wanted to plow straight ahead. The suspension? Primitive by today's standards. The tires? Skinny bias plies that struggled to grip the road, especially when all that torque came crashing down on them. And the brakes? Well, let's just say after a couple of hard stops, they faded faster than you'd believe. Then there was the wheel spin. Anyone who's ever driven one will tell you, in first gear, traction was almost a joke. You pressed the throttle too hard, and the rear end would light up in smoke. On a drag strip, that was part of the fun. But out on regular streets, especially if the road was wet, it could turn deadly in an instant. The truth is, this car demanded skill, patience, and respect. And let's be honest, most of the people buying these in the early 70s were young guys, barely in their 20s, hungry for speed but not ready for the responsibility. That combination made the Mach 1 SCJ a rolling time bomb. It didn't take long for the danger to show itself. All across the country, accident reports started piling up. Stories of Mach 1 Super Cobra Jets spinning out, fishtailing into oncoming traffic, or wrapping themselves around telephone poles. For every kid who bragged about beating a Camaro or a Charger, there was another who never made it home. Even the police noticed. One Ohio State patrolman later admitted, "Every time we got called to a bad wreck with a Mustang in 71 or 72, 9 times out of 10, it was one of those big block SCJs. They were just too much car for the average kid." That reputation spread fast, and soon the Mach 1 429 SCJ was whispered about the same way people talked about the Hemi Cuda or the Charger 440, a car that could thrill you one moment and kill you the next. Insurance companies weren't blind to it either. Premiums on these cars skyrocketed, in some cases costing as much as the monthly payment for the car itself. For many young buyers, that meant the dream ended before it even began. Sales dried up quickly, not because people didn't want the car, but because they simply couldn't afford to keep one insured. The Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet had gone from Ford's proud muscle machine to something much darker, an outlaw of sort. It was fast, it was feared, and it was quickly becoming a symbol of everything that regulators and insurance companies were fighting to shut down. For the folks who actually owned one of these cars, the memories are still sharp, even decades later. Some talk about the Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet with awe, while others remember it with a kind of nervous laughter, like they're grateful they survived it. One owner recalled, "The car felt like it wanted to tear itself apart. First gear was useless, you just lit up the tires. But once you got rolling, nothing pulled like that car on the highway." For him, it was pure adrenaline, the kind of machine that made you feel alive every time you pressed the pedal. But not everyone looked back so fondly. Another admitted, "It was terrifying. You'd be fine one second, and then sideways the next with no warning. The power came in like a sledgehammer." That unpredictability turned what should have been a dream car into something closer to a gamble. Exciting, but always one mistake away from disaster. And compared to the smaller block Mustangs, or even the Boss 351, the SCJ wasn't really a sports car at all. It was a blunt instrument, a weapon designed to crush the quarter mile, not carve corners. On the drag strip, it made perfect sense. On city streets and back roads, it was a different story. For many who drove them in their youth, the Mach 1 SCJ became a symbol of both freedom and fear. It gave you stories to tell, but not everyone who drove one got the chance to tell them. By the mid-1970s, the landscape had changed. The muscle car era was beginning to fade, and cars like the Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet had become increasingly rare, not because people didn't want them, but because so many didn't survive. Accidents, high insurance costs, and the collapse of the muscle car market after 1973 claimed countless SCJs. What remained were survivors, the lucky few that endured both the roads and the hands of cautious owners. Today, those surviving cars are nothing short of legends. Collectors hunt them down, often paying six-figure sums to claim a genuine SCJ Mach 1. But it's not just the numbers that make them special, it's the story behind the metal. Every dent, scratch, and period modification tells the tale of a car that demanded respect, a car that could thrill and terrify in equal measure. In many ways, the Mach 1 SCJ has become an icon of a time when Detroit pushed boundaries without apology. It's a reminder of the golden and dangerous days of American muscle. Drive one today, and you're not just behind the wheel of a fast car. You're holding a piece of history, a raw artifact from an era when horsepower ruled and restraint was optional. Even now, 50 years later, the legend of the Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet endures. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a thrill, and, for many, a cautionary tale all rolled into one. The 1971 Ford Mustang Mach 1 429 Super Cobra Jet was more than just a car, it was a statement of an era. It embodied the peak of Detroit's horsepower wars, the raw, untamed ambition of engineers willing to push the limits of speed, power, and danger. For those lucky enough to drive one, it offered thrills unlike anything else on the street. But that same power came with a cost, unpredictability, danger, and a reputation that terrified insurance companies and law enforcement alike. It was a car of extremes. A car that could make your heart race with joy one moment and leave you gripping the wheel in fear the next. In the right hands, it was a masterpiece of muscle. In the wrong hands, it could be deadly. And perhaps that's why it's remembered so vividly today. It wasn't just a Mustang, it was the final, unfiltered roar of big block American muscle before regulations, fuel crises, and common sense brought the era to an end. More than 50 years later, the Mach 1 SCJ continues to captivate. It stands as a reminder of a time when Detroit dared to dream bigger, louder, and more dangerously than anyone thought possible. It's a car that was both a dream and a nightmare, and that's exactly why it will never be forgotten.